Hello, everybody. How are we today? I hope everybody is having a wonderful Sunday. Um, I am just sharing the stream to my social media, um, and then we will jump right in, and that'll give everybody a moment, to get in here and all of that fun stuff. How is everybody's Sunday? So far, mine has been much less crazy than my yesterday afternoon was. Thankfully, Mr. Loki has refrained from getting into anything that he's not supposed to get into today. We have made sure that any and all plant parts are no longer lying around. Still, so far, the only thing that we were able to find um, with Loki was the plant that happened to be behind the kitchen garbage. Um, so yes, is anybody doing anything fun? I did make a trip to Aldi, not like many people care, but I did make a trip to Aldi and I got a whole bunch of scores. Hold on, I gotta grab a toy for him before he destroys my laundry basket. Oh, what happened? What are you doing? Sorry, I'm being attacked by the dog now. Um, yes. So, what has everybody done? Have you guys decorated for Christmas at all? Are you preparing for Thanksgiving? Because, yeah, that's Thursday. So yes, join me. Sorry for the squeaking in the background while I am finishing sending everything over to social media. Will you scooch it? All right. Let me pull up our trial video. And of course, I have to reselect my screen. All right, there we go. All right, so who is ready to pick up where we left off on Billy Wagner's pretrial hearing? Um, so far, we had just gotten out of basically this judge's pleasantries and explanations as far as why he is doing things um, in a way that is different than how it's typically done in a trial. Um, Only because at one point, Billy Wagner's team, right before his hearing last year in 2023, had requested for the judge to be removed and there to be seated a new judge. Only because he was supposed to have the same judge as his son, George IV. And according to everybody, they were unable to. I really got to fix that. Um, but they were unable to get a fair trial, is basically what it was coming up against. So the courts in Ohio gave George III, Billy Wagner, um, a new judge. Well, Now his defense team is saying, okay, now that we have a new judge, we want to change a venue. And so this judge is explaining that the change of venue has kind of been sitting on his desk. He apologizes for it. He does state that it needs to be addressed soon. It's just not going to be addressed today. They are also covering other pretrial motions, evidentiary issues, I'm pretty sure discovery issues, if I remember correctly from what I had listened to a little bit before coming live yesterday. Um, a lot of this I will also be hearing for the first time. It's not just you guys. Um, I do like to listen and see as much of what I'm giving you guys for the first time with you, or at least make it so that if I have seen it before, um, it has been a while, so you guys are still getting a fairly genuine reaction um to a lot of what is being said and all of that fun stuff. So with that being said, we have our trial video up. I am going to mute and we are going to jump right back into Billy Wagner's pre-trial hearing. And for those of you who didn't see yesterday's, Billy Wagner is George William Wagner III. And he is the family patriarch of the Wagner family and one of the 4 Wagners that is accused of murdering 8 members of the Rhoden family.
Hodgepodge of different evidence at different times. Trial.
Cooking for one doesn't make sense. If you want to eat better without wasting hours cleaning and prepping, or
The discovery in this case, it was produced years ago, and it was produced kind of in different segments that wasn't as...
There wasn't a felony child notebook that I could just copy.
It was a hodgepodge of different evidence at different times, and it was hard to connect the dots, and it was, we went back and forth whether we had everything or not, but it was difficult in the way that it was compiled. To assist in this next trial, it'd be advantageous to say, this is what the state intends to introduce as far as the evidence, to make sure we do have that in the original discovery, as well as, if they're going to mark that the same as the first trial, just knowing what everything was, it would help facilitate. My fear is we're in trial. I'm not sure if I've ever seen this before. I don't know if I've had this. So if we did have somewhat of a general list, and we can kind of sort that out, it would help, I think, move the trial along.
Ms. Canepa.
I don't have a problem doing that, Your Honor. I need to refine that list and clean it up, I guess. As I indicated to the court, I mean, it's over 1,000 pieces of evidence, so, it got fairly voluminous. Obviously, they also have the benefit of the transcripts that I provided them in discovery a year ago now, more than a year ago. So that certainly helps a little, but I'm all for, doing that. I would do it for my own self anyhow, so I would see that as something that can be done.
Does the defense foresee any, discovery issues?
Not discovery in and of itself, Your Honor. Where I see the potential delay that I think we're going to work on, I believe on December 16th, is the 404B stuff. We have been provided a list back in February, I think, of 21 or 22. It's pretty exhaustive. And preparing for today, when you go through, is it relevant, number one? If it's relevant, is it character evidence? Is it character? Does it meet one of the exceptions? If it does it meet the exceptions? Is it still, prejudicial? So I think some of the things, I'm assuming the prosecution's not going to use to try and Billy's, but I think as long as we work the next 6 weeks on that stuff, then it should. So when you say discovery, not itself, but some of those things I think are appropriate, some of them aren't, but that's just our opinion. I'm sure the government has a different opinion, so.
I'm sure we have a different opinion. Yes, sir.
Nobody needs to get up and talk on their feet. My apologies. You can do whatever you want. If you're comfortable on your feet, if you wanted to relax and lean back, thanks for the respect. Just not necessary if you don't think it's working for you. Go ahead.
It's hard not to do it.
No, it's whatever you want to do, you can do. No offense taken, however you want to do it.
I think what it's going to involve is us meeting, we do all have the fortune of living and working in close proximity to one another geographically. So, I know that we anticipate meeting now that they've got the witness list, talking about stipulations and witnesses that we are going to need to call versus not need to call. I would anticipate the same thing with the exhibits and with the other acts as well, that we can narrow it down to those things that are disputed or whatever. So,
Like I'm trying to understand where you're getting hung up and if I can do anything to help.
To help, Your Honor, just to kind of, I'll just give general categories. That was filed back in February 2021. There's stuff that specifically goes to Jake, stuff that specifically goes to George, stuff that specifically goes to Angela, and stuff that specifically is alleged of my client's other acts. So and there's kind of groups like that. So just depending on what they intend to introduce, because, initially, potentially it could have been all four of them, having trial at the same time, and the state chose to bifurcate. So, so then it's always been a question of, hey, what are they going to use on our client, or, try to use on that. So that's kind of the concept. Did that help?
It does.
Okay.
Thanks. Like we might be sorting this out in the middle of the trial, like we always do.
Potentially, yes.
Like I would expect that.
Yeah, we probably will. I just don't want to have to do the ones that really, are cut and dry, that you feel one way or another, perhaps, in advance, so.
Mr. Hayes doesn't know me well, but I'm relatively certain he doesn't want to see an interlocutory appeal. Nor does any lawyer want that. Unless, of course, you need it, then you find a way to get it. Okay. With regard to discovery, is there anything else the defense wants to bring up?
No.
How about the state with regard to discovery?
no. I think we are, as far as the state is concerned, have provided everything that we should. Obviously, we have an ongoing duty to continue to do so, which we would absolutely continue to do. And I don't suppose that they have anything that they should be giving me either, so.
If it's of any help, I never liked as a trial lawyer to be ambushed. And then I realized the remedy to the ambush as a judge is to set the evidence aside, toss them out, not give people a chance to adjust to the newly discovered evidence. So even though I know a remedy is to give a continuance, I'm often hesitant to go that way, and I'm more inclined to say it's too late to bring it in now, so whether you're ineffective or whether I just committed an irreversible error will be sorted out later. So, we want to get this right. Mr. Wagner, we want to do this right the first time. That's what this is all about. And I don't usually find lawyers that are trying to shank anybody. They often get overwhelmed by the difficulty of the case and the amount of materials to absorb. And that's where it comes up. So we'll try not to have that happen. That's why you got a good batch of lawyers standing around you. I will acknowledge that I still have sitting on my desk the answer to your motion for change of venue. But it's meant to be sitting there, but it can't sit much longer. So I'll let that get filed when it seems like we're closer I knew I wasn't going to file it before today. Like, I'm still learning, I'm still processing the whole litany. There were copious amounts of expected motions that the defense filed in response to the specification for death. And I think the last representation from one of the defense lawyers was most of those are being withdrawn.
Your skin isn't the same as everyone else's. That's why Agency designed Future Formula, a personalized.
Because they were filed in anticipation of being thorough. So you want to talk in that regard, Mr. Hayes, whatever, Mr. Collins? I don't care.
I think hypothetically, Your Honor, they will be withdrawn once we get to a magic point of not needing them, so to speak. I don't mean magic in that way. Yeah, and I believe that will hopefully happen before the December status conference or motion hearing. So I think that is that's our intention, Your Honor. It's our intention to withdraw them unless something comes in sideways.
Does that sound right, Mr. Knepper?
Does sound right, Your Honor.
Very close, Your Honor.
From my first event, I've heard the discussion, the negotiations about writing an appropriate agreement with regard to whatever it is you're trying to agree upon. So how are we working on your agreement?
Your Honor, as this court knows, or I think we brought to the attention, and I don't think anyone would dispute this, the agreement that we're trying to fashion, there's not really a template for it. And, you know, we're trying to accomplish certain legal realities, and it's, you know, just a matter of wordsmithing it so that both parties are satisfied that if an event happens, we're in the position that we need to be in. And so it's, you know, we're working on it. We've done back and forth. You know, but we're not there yet.
Conceptually, we've agreed.
Conceptually, we agree.
So that's tactfully vague, but I won't let it go. So now tell me what you're trying to do with more specificity, because I want a more specific record.
I believe as a group we're trying to achieve the concept of nobody is accused or can be found of ineffective assistance of counsel, and no one can be accused of prosecutorial misconduct, so to speak. Is that a fair way of putting it? And that it's a fair resolution that all parties, maybe you don't agree with 100%, but they agreed to 100% when it's signed and everything, but they agreed to work towards that measure.
What's the trigger for the lawyers to have personal responsibility? Like, what are you dealing with?
It's an unorthodox situation, and again, it doesn't happen very often, and so there's not a lot of guidance for us on case law or things of that nature that will, give us, hey, definitely. So we kept our client up to date on everything. He's in agreement, and so once I believe the government is satisfied with some specifics, then we'll have everything in agreement.
All right, so for those of you who haven't really kept up with the case, what they are talking about is introduction of new evidence that has come to light since George III's request for a new judge last year. Now, don't get me wrong. I have absolutely zero idea what this new evidence is. I just know that it has been a point of contention since last year. And what they are ultimately trying to do right now is come up with the ability to introduce this new evidence in a way that is not going to be seen down the line as ineffective assistance of counsel on the defense's part, but also um, does not hold the prosecution accountable for not bringing up this evidence until now, um, as the evidence was not readily available before 2023. Now, again, whatever that evidence is, I have no idea. I just know that um, it was either last summer or this summer, a hearing over some of this evidence, and they were made to hold off until a new judge was picked in the case. Um, and so that's kind of why it's on the docket now. Um, because this judge came onto the case, I want to say either the beginning of this year or this summer. Um, and so they were trying to give him time to catch up on basically 8 years worth of um of what's it called? 8 years worth of evidence and case law and all of that has come with it. I apologize. Words are difficult at the moment. Um, so yes, that is exactly what they're talking about right now. I know it is, as the judge put it, tactfully vague. I believe that a lot of this is being tactfully vague. With hopes that if they don't catch the judge up too much, then he's not going to feel confident enough to hold the trial within his jurisdiction, and he may then grant the change of venue for the defense. Um, I feel that to some extent as well, they are being tactfully vague on the prosecution side, trying not to give up um, too much of where their evidence is going before trial, if they don't have to. But again, I'm not entirely sure if this evidence is beneficial for the defense or the prosecution. I am going to assume that it is probably not that great for either side if they're coming up with this type of an agreement. Um, but if you analyze it in a different way, please feel free to put it in the comments. I really enjoy when we all have a discussion going on. Um, and yeah, back to our video.
Is this in the realm of removal of the death penalty
Yes, sir.
specification?
Yes, sir.
Does it go beyond that? Mr. Wagner, from the start, this case has been really important because of a specification calling for the death penalty. You've heard that before, right?
Yeah, Your Honor, I've heard it.
Okay.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Then there was a series of negotiations, and there's witnesses who have testified based upon representations that the death penalty is to be removed, right?
They've mentioned that.
Okay, so I think that's a foregone conclusion based upon the representations from the lawyers.
Maybe.
So I'm taking this where I want to take it, but is it a foregone conclusion that the death penalty specification is being withdrawn?
I believe so. I don't want to, commit perjury or anything.
Okay, so, oh, I apologize. Give me 1 second. Sorry, this damn cold just does not want to go away. I was getting ready to pop a cough drop right before they brought up about the death penalty. So, for those of you who missed the live yesterday, this is a really important factor in this case. So, while there is plenty of mitigating factors, of um, plenty of death penalty specific factors, and this case being death penalty qualified, um, there is the complexity behind the case that I apologize, that Jake Wagner was the first during COVID to come up and say, hey, I am guilty. I will plead guilty. I will testify against the rest of my family members, but you have to take the death penalty off of the table. And this only came because his grandmother, Rita Newcomb, had actually pleaded guilty and took a plea deal to lesser charges in the case, as far as like fraudulent documentation, conspiracy, and all kinds of stuff. Um, she was facing fairly significant charges, but she was the first one to take a plea deal in this case and admit, hey, there was wrongdoing in this case. There is sufficient evidence against me. I'm going to take this plea deal. Um, then Jake Wagner came up and he was like, hey, if you guys want the nail in the coffin for this, I've got it, but I want the death penalty off of the table. Um, and then it was like 5 months or so later, and from all of the accounts that I have heard, and this is just speculation on my part, I haven't requested any FOIA to really prove this or not, but about 5 months later, Angela Wagner, Jake Wagner, and George Wagner the Fourth's mother and the matriarch of the family, then pleaded guilty for lesser charges for herself, um, which is selfish. It really just goes to show the level of narcissism in this woman. And please, anything that I'm talking about psychology wise is not a diagnosis. Um, I am not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. It is just from my own little bit of knowledge of the world of psychology. Um, the fact that I am in school for psychology. I have taken previous psychology courses even before the psychology aspect of it. And so while I am still basically a psychological noob, I do have my own experiences with narcissism, um, with like bipolar disorder, with people who have paranoid schizophrenic tendencies. Um, I personally suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder, dyscalculia, autism, um, OCD, PTSD, chronic PTSD, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, agoraphobia, driving anxiety. I mean, and those are just the things that I can rattle off the top of my head. Um, and so I have a fair amount of experience with people who suffer from mental health issues. I spend an awful lot of time um, researching these mental health disorders because one of my autistic special interests, along with true crime, is psychology. and kind of understanding why people do the things that they do. Um, I think a lot of it really truly stems from the fact that I was extremely and severely abused as a child. And, I always strived to try to figure out what it was that I did so wrong throughout my entire life that I was treated the way that I was. Um, and it just led me down this path of feeling like I always need to be able to explain why somebody does something. Um, and the complexities of mental health are just, they're insane. There's so many things that overlap um, with so many different disorders. And so it's really hard to, even as a professional, be able to diagnose these people if you have extensive time with them. So these are all just my opinions from my own research of things psychology based, from my true crime analyses that I have watched, um, from many of the body analysis experts and things like that that I have seen. So they're all just opinion and conjecture, um, and not actual fact. I like to make that known. I like to try to keep everything as fact based as possible here. I also like to make sure that I am, you know, not adding to any potential rumors. Um, and so I like to let everybody know when something is just my opinion or speculation. Um, I am going to go back to the court hearing now that I kind of explained a little bit about why the death penalty in this case is such a big deal. Um, oh, and the death penalty is off of the case, is off of everybody's tables as long as Jake Wagner testifies to the prosecution's, I'm trying to think of the wording that they use, to the prosecution's satisfaction. Same thing with Angela Wagner. She will only get 30 years in prison for lesser charges as long as she testifies against everybody else, um, to the prosecution's satisfaction. So I think that's why they are really hesitant to specifically say, yes, the death penalty is for sure off of the table, because it's all dependent on, um, basically how well Jake and Angela perform in court. Um, so I am going to be quiet and we're going to jump back in.
But that is the goal. If we can get the language that, so let me give you this scenario. In George Wagner's case, his son's case, we did it as a death penalty case because the agreement with Jake Wagner is if you testify truthfully, then we dismiss the death fact not only for you, but for the individual that you are testifying in
Right.
their trial.
Similar representation in Angela Wagner's?
No.
So
No, we did not reach that agreement with her.
Okay.
So it's only Jake. So,
Okay, so I just wanted to hop on here and make a quick correction. I apologize. I thought that they had that agreement for both Jake and Angela, but apparently, um, testifying to the prosecution's satisfaction, only covers Jake Wagner and not Angela. Um, so yes, um, Angela, whether she testifies truthfully or not, will still get her 30 years. Um, I am going to assume potentially that it is because of the fact that um the fact that Angela's is basically a life sentence anyway at this point. Um and so it may not really make much of a difference for Angela's case. But I apologize. I just wanted to go ahead and make that correction. And I will get back to the video.
In that scenario, the state, and the state alone, decides whether or not they're satisfied that Jake Wagner appeared and testified truthfully, right? Because we don't dismiss the death sentence unless we believe that to be true. In this situation, we're trying to fashion it so that we dismiss it ahead of time, again, for the mutual benefit of the parties. The unorthodox that he's talking about is they have to weigh double jeopardy and speedy trial as to the death specs. We have to dismiss it ahead of time, and we have to have enough assurances that if things go sideways, which I don't think any of us actually anticipates happening, but if that event were to occur, the state has to feel confident that it would have that same ability to make that decision, that whether or not Jake Wagner has fulfilled his end of the bargain, right? So, as Mr. Collins said, I'm unaware of anybody else doing this on the planet. Now, maybe they have, I just don't know that. But that's the challenge. And we're both sides are trying earnestly to fashion an agreement that accomplishes, confidence in the agreement that we get, that it's accomplishing what they need to do, it protects their clients' rights, and, the state protects its rights as well.
Anything else? Thank you. Anything,
Yes.
Mr. Collins, Mr. Hayes on this?
I think that's a fair assessment, James. We appreciate you asking about the concept.
Selling a house the traditional way can be a long process filled with unexpected costs, unclear timelines, and last-minute fees that
Okay. So I don't know about you guys, but I really like this judge. I really feel like he could be a very fair judge in this case. I feel like he is probably Billy Wagner's best bet for an immensely fair trial. Um, he really does seem to be looking out for the benefit of both the prosecution and the defense, which I really commend him for, because if I was in his position, I honestly can't say that I would be um that I would be as, what's the word I'm looking for? As forethinking. I don't know if I would be able to be as unbiased. Especially, well, I mean, he didn't work on George the Fourth's case, but um, even knowing what I know about the case, like, I can be fair in a lot of cases. Um, but I don't know if I would be able to remain objective. That was the word I was looking for earlier. Objective and unbiased in this case. Um, I'm gonna say that my Aries side on this one uh, would probably take a front seat, and that temperament and that like advocacy need and that like wanting um, to stand up for justice and for what's right, I think would probably blind me in a case like this. Um, how do you guys feel? Do you guys feel so far that this judge is doing a good job? Do you feel like Billy Wagner would be better off in Piketon for this, or do you feel um that he would be better off in a different jurisdiction, in a different venue? Um, I'm really interested to hear what everybody has to say.
Everybody in the room needs to understand, I'm not going to be on the tip of the spear. Like, my patience has been necessary and appropriate, and I'm not going to micromanage the lawyers. But what you're telling me is no different than what I heard in September, and I believe everything you just said. I have full confidence you can get there. When you don't get there, and I become the tip of the spear, the first person that says something about needing more time to prepare a case that's not going to have more time to be prepared puts everybody in the room in a really bad place, because everything that hasn't been done, based upon the representations and assurances that we would get there, then becomes a powder burn on everybody's face at Mr. Wagner's expense, which we're not going to do. Now, you're working, I appreciate this. I know I've got good lawyers on both sides of this case. It's a pleasure, but I'm not going to let this case become me on the tip of the spear. The court system isn't designed to take responsibility when negotiations appropriately break down. We are months and months and months behind where you would be on a case that goes to trial with a despot.
I understand everything you're saying, Judge, and so that there's complete disclosure. At a prior time, with a prior judge, we were told, we were guided to stop litigation because of cost issues. So that would be the only issue, potentially, if the agreement doesn't work out. However, I can make adjustments on that as well. With our experts, so to speak, and things of that nature. So.
Yeah, I'll circle back to that, I hope. What do you have on your list? You got anything on your list, Mr. Hayes?
You touched them all.
Mr. Collins?
You touched them all for us, Your Honor.
You have a list going, Ms. Canepa?
No, Your Honor, I mean, we have another hearing set December 16th, currently. And obviously, 100% respect the court's, I guess what I'm saying is, I think at some point, we're going to have to issue summons for jurors in this case. And so, I don't know if December 16th is early enough. I mean, if that gives us enough time
Oh, no,
to
yeah,
the
there's-
January 3rd court date.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Well,
I'll have my venue decision before then. That's what you're looking
Okay.
for.
Okay,
No, I'm not waiting till the 16th.
okay. And, we'll work on jury questionnaires and stuff too, I mean, all those things that
Sure.
we indicated, so. Okay, thank you, Anna.
No, that's very tactful. Maybe unexpectedly tactful.
Maybe I don't want. That's right.
I'm sure that came from Mr. O'Brien.
I don't want to rush the court's decision.
Who, for the benefit of the record, has sat here for 40 minutes and not said a word, which is
That
maybe a first time in
That
ever.
is a world record, Your Honor, and so the record's clear, Mr. O'Brien was not just a good prosecutor, he was a good defense attorney too, as he co-counseled the case with me and discussed it with that, so. And there is no conflict in any way of that comment, anything like that, so. But he's an outstanding prosecutor and defense attorney.
Funny that his bio didn't reflect any defense work.
That's fairly recent, Your Honor.
Okay, I would like to make some record of negotiations with regard to pleas. I'm not suggesting anybody should plea Mr. Wagner, but there's a legal duty that if there's offers made by the state, that they be communicated to you. So I always, you'll hear me do this again, ask the lawyers if they've had negotiations. If there were negotiations, have they been communicated to you? Because hindsight is 20/20, and everybody wants the deal after it left. Once the horse leaves the barn, they want to ride it. It's too late. So I'm going to ask the state if they've made any plea offers. Just go yes or no.
Maybe.
If you can.
Yes.
You want to own this?
It may be more
Go with it.
clear. Your Honor, it's been given to us that they are, the government is always willing to listen to a potential plea, but we would have to bring that plea to them. The government has engaged us in different concepts of different possibilities, but it had to be firm from us to them before they would ever go to the victim's family to determine that. We've advised that of our client and putting a little bit more legwork into that lately, but that's where it is. So there is no specific offer, but they are open to suggestions and open to, but the suggestions, so to speak, have to be firm.
Okay. So I want to take just a moment here. As you can see, the Rhoden family does not look impressed. And I can't say that I blame them. They are talking about the defense doing extra legwork to take a plea deal to the state that would benefit Billy Wagner before the January court date in 2025. I cannot even begin to comprehend the immense pain that every single one of those members of the Rhoden family sitting there are probably feeling even 8 years later. My heart truly breaks for not just the Rhoden family, but those children, every single last one of them that lost their parents and their grandparents and their uncle, and just, it's terrible. And I can only imagine how immensely difficult something like this is, especially having to sit there and listen to um the negotiations, you know. And while I understand that the negotiations are so that, George Wagner gets a fair trial and so that actual justice can be served for this family, but at what expense, at what cost? Um, and so I hope that if anybody from the Rhoden family is watching this, um, please know that my heart goes out to every single member of your family. Um, and if anybody from the Wagner family is watching this, I fully understand that um, George, Angela, Jake, and Billy Wagner's actions should not reflect on who you guys are as human beings and as people. Um, and my heart breaks for your guys' side of the family too, because, I am sure that there is retribution. It's, paying for somebody else's crimes, essentially, a lot of the time. The remaining family of the people who break the law usually are looked at in a really bad light, almost as if they had committed the crime themselves. And a lot of people forget that many of these family members are just innocent, average, everyday people that will go to their graves, you know, committing stupid minor traffic infractions and things like that. Um, and so it is very sad to see the damage that gets done on both sides. The children, the sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents that all have to face the consequences of what someone else did. Um, and so I feel that the Rhoden family is so brave and so strong um, for being able to even sit in that courtroom. Um, And to the Rhoden family, your loved ones are not going to be forgotten. Um, and I am so sorry that this is one of the things that they have to be remembered for.
Or at least, to get them to go to the victim's family. I think that's kind of captured the negotiations back and forth so far.
Is that fair?
I think that's fair, yes.
We've talked about flat time, we've talked about other things, we've talked about different concepts, comparing and contrasting. And then each time we give those concepts to our client, he sometimes is very frustrated with us. But we believe that that's our ethical duty to continue to do that, regardless of.
Well, 100%. That's why I'm going to make sure
Okay.
that your ethical duty's covered on the record, so you don't have to try to fish through otherwise confidential files and decide whether you can disclose. Because the answer is yes, but you got to be in a forum you don't want to be in. So, we're not going to go there.
Understood, yeah.
That's for your benefit and your clients. Explain to me, if you could, in this evolving area of law, what you think your duty is to the victims. Now, this is for you folks back there, because I said the last go around that the state's attorneys don't represent you. That's not a new concept. You should have heard that like 100 times already. But I don't know what it means to the states. You get the benefit of hearing what I get to hear. So go, if you would.
Your Honor, I'm sure the court is familiar with the law surrounding victims' rights, and as a prosecutor, I am required to make sure they know hearings. I am required to consult with them anytime I'm going to resolve a case. I am not bound by their wishes, but as far as legal duties to them, those are my legal responsibilities to the victim's family, is to make sure they know what's going on with the case, and, yeah.
The reason I ask is Mr. Collins started it by saying he needed to give you a firm offer that you could take to the victims.
Yes.
Then it gets really murky, depending on the prosecutor and the venue, whether the victims have some sort of implied understanding that they get to make the call. I didn't hear you say that they make the call.
Legally, they don't get to make the call. Every prosecutor, right, handles it differently, and I would say, I also factor in my belief on how the case should be resolved or not be resolved. But I certainly, especially in a case of this magnitude and the loss to this family, I certainly am going to strongly factor in their opinions before I would resolve the case. It's different, say, right? Like if you have a rape victim who's going to have to go through the trial and be on the witness stand, and if that person, that individual is willing to go through that, that's a strong testament that I should do it too. She doesn't want to, or if they don't want to resolve it with a lower offense. All to say, Your Honor, as a prosecutor, I feel that I should factor in their opinion, absolutely. But they do not get to determine whether or not the case is resolved in any given fashion.
Thank you. So this is me yakking at all you folks. Understand that you have constitutional rights, as does the defendant. And in some respects, they differ in their quality. So what the prosecutor just said in a nice sort of way, or what I think she just said, is she's going to communicate, try to meet your expectations. In the end, it's not your call, it's hers. Now I'm going to build on that a step further. Because what the prosecutor might say to me, or what the defense lawyers might say to the judge, equally isn't the outcome of the case. Like there's mutual recommendations that often come out of plea negotiations. And that's fine and that's appropriate. And my personal philosophy has been to not upset the card table when everybody deals the deck they want. So I think only one time in my life have I ever refused a plea agreement for what I thought was really good reason. That doesn't mean, however, that the lawyer should think I fell asleep and did exactly what they wanted. Maybe I'm talking to them and staring at you. Their recommendations are really important, but they aren't binding on the court. So they can both say the same thing, and I can go a different route because judges are supposed to have their own independence. Now, that applies in this case. It's equally applicable in the companion cases, where I'm staring at plea agreements that have mutual recommendations that are helpful. I'm just trying to set the stage that nobody should assume anything moving forward. Mutual recommendations can be softened or hardened, depending on how they play out. And I don't do this because I think I have the luxury. I say this because I have a duty to tell you of my independence. Statutory requirement, constitutional requirement to consider everything that's said by anybody that's relevant and then follow the law. Not do what my personal belief might be or my own fancy, but to follow the law. That's how we get there. Imperfect as it is, it's how we get there. So Ms. Canepa did a nice job. She set the stage for me to tell you she's going to work really hard. She'll try to represent your interest. And whenever it breaks down, if it breaks down, it's because at some point in time it's expected to or it's appropriate that it does. But her legal duty is to tell you what the heck's going on. So when I started this whole affair out by talking to Mr. Wagner about cutting him out of the private discussions in chambers, I did the same to you folks. Purposefully, and that's why we're not doing it that way today. We're going to get as much out in front of everybody so there is this effective communication that takes the burden off the prosecutor to try to tell you what the heck happened. What else do you have? Anything from the defense? Mr. Hayes, Mr. Collins?
Oh, yeah.
Ms. Canepa?
No, Your Honor.
Dare I ask Mr. O'Brien if you have anything to say?
Your Honor, I think you know more about the case. Actually, I have a benefit because the wiretaps that were done in this case were issued in Franklin County. So as the applicant on the wiretaps, I have familiarity with the case prior to being appointed. But based on what I know so far about the trial aspect, I don't have anything additional.
So here are the orders coming out of today's hearing. On representation by the state of Ohio, the death penalty specification is dismissed. The case proceeds without that specification. All of the defendants' pending motions are dismissed because most of them were focused upon the death penalty, and then also the lack of anybody prosecuting the motions. I tried to make a record a long time ago, tell me what you need to do. So for benefit of the record, it's not the judge didn't get his work done, as he wasn't given the work to do. So all your pending pretrial motions are gone. The death penalty specification is gone. The death penalty specification is gone. I'm not on the tip of the spear. I understand, Ms. Canepa, your dilemma. Only to compound the dilemma, will I now tell you that I'm going to proceed to sentencing in advance of trial on the other cases. So I'm proceeding to sentencing. I'm going to ask the court staff to have Angela Wagner, the other Wagner case, set for sentencing. I'm done waiting.
Okay,
I'm
well,
done.
obviously, you know that I will be objecting to every single thing that you just said, so.
Totally should. I didn't expect to make anybody happy.
Your Honor, you can't dismiss a motion. We have not dismissed the specifications. We have not made a motion to dismiss the specifications.
And if you think I have to have motions, nothing would ever get done. I'm not trying to run this case until I think it's necessary for the court to run the case, not hear continued representations that we're going to get this thing negotiated when I'm now at 4 months waiting for something that was inevitable that has never happened. So in my impatience, I'm going to lead. And that's how I'm going to lead. And the nice thing is I told you this 3 weeks sooner than I maybe had to. So I don't expect you to agree. You can have all the objection you want.
To disagree is what you expect. Because if you sentence the defendants, what happens legally to the state's ability to enforce their plea agreements?
Tell me why this, I know the answer, so do you. And it's found in State versus Gilbert.
Okay.
We all know this.
And so you're going to knowingly do that on a case where those two admitted to plotting for 4 months to kill 8 individuals, most of them while they slept.
I know the facts of the case.
I really applaud Canepa here. Because she is doing an excellent job arguing for sentencing should not be imposed quite yet. And for excellent reason. As she said, how do you uphold a plea agreement for this case if you are not going to wait until after for sentencing? But at the same sense, I do understand where this judge does not want to wait until the last minute to be told, oh, this is a death penalty case now and not, like life imprisonment or whatever. I totally see where he objects to the starting it out as a non-death penalty case and then flipping it to a death penalty case if Jake Wagner fails his portion of the plea agreement. And I do also see where that can be problematic. Hi, Loki. But again, I do also see Angela Canepa's frustration with this and why she's arguing. Um, if I was a lawyer, I would be definitely arguing that point as well. So, but I do also kind of see where, like, I mean, even if George Wagner gets 30 years in prison, um, you know, that is pretty much a life sentence for him at this point. Um, so I do kind of understand where he kind of wants an executive decision on this.
Case, thank you for the transcript. The problem is twofold.
Well, we're not going to trial on January 3rd then, obviously.
No, you have this.
You can't dismiss defects without a motion by the state. When there is more than sufficient evidence to support a death penalty specification in this case, because we have got the testimony, sworn testimony of his two co-defendants, that he participated and personally killed 3 people. So the court has no basis to do this, no legal basis to do it.
Now, when I start talking, can we assume that you won't? I get that you're upset. You don't get that the court's been hearing representations for months about the quality of your case and the cooperation of the state's witnesses that I'm getting ready to sentence and their truthfulness, and that they're all locked in the bag, ready to go, solid case. The fact that you'll have this plea agreement worked out was supposed to have been done shortly after September, shortly after October. Every time we've met, I've asked and heard you represent, we're getting there, we're getting there. It was like somebody played a record today. We're getting there. Well, I'm on the tip of the spear for everything that you're not doing. So I'm telling you, we're not going forward with trial on a death penalty specification when the defense isn't ready because the state's not ready. I'm not assigning fault. I'm saying the clock ran out. The clock ran out. You know how this could play. I know how this could play. The next move is yours. I get that. I get that. I'm just telling you that we're not going to pussyfoot around any longer with assurances of things that may never happen. Oh, by the way, if you don't get your agreement worked out, we're not going to trial anyway because there's 1,000 motions that got to be decided because everybody has said we don't need all those motions decided. So I struck their motions because of your representations that we're going to get there. I get it. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong. I'm saying the clock ran out.
Yeah.
So, do whatever you got to do. Like, I'm not going to journalize this tomorrow. The staff will go scheduling with all these guaranteed good cooperative witnesses you have lined up. And I understand what Gilbert says.
Why are you trying to sabotage this case?
I'm not.
No, yes, you absolutely are.
Okay, take the record.
If I may address the court by the state, Your Honor, I understand the court's frustration, but the state cannot unilaterally force the defendant to enter into an agreement when there's ongoing discussions. I think the court properly can and should set a deadline if the court wants to set a deadline, but I have never seen a death penalty dismissed absent the state making the request, the defense making the request. I understood at least what the court said. You have unilaterally decided because the clock ran out that you're going to dismiss death penalty specs, and I just don't think the court has that authority or has a sufficient record should an interlocutory appeal be taken to support it. And so I think I would ask that the court give the parties until, this is what day, I lose track of days, till Monday to present to the court a written agreement before the court would issue the kind of order that you just described.
You could have till Monday, and thank you for the courtesy of giving me yet another assurance. I'm working with you. As much as it sounded like I wasn't, I worked with the lawyers to this point, short as it is. I get it, everybody's been here since 2018, right?
Not everybody.
I'm the last guy on the bench, right? Criminal Rule 48B gives the court authority to announce in open court on the record the reasons for its dismissal of a case. It's an extraordinary remedy if you want to call the death penalty specification dismissal, but it's not outside the rules. I have to explain why. If I let this go longer and we don't get to the agreement, clearly anything that happens at trial is going to be reversed for all of the work that didn't get done because everybody said it wasn't. So the reason's going to be the lack of adequate time to do what needs to get done for a death penalty case to go forward. Everybody knows in the room, everybody's ineffective if this case goes to trial in January as a death penalty case. Mr. O'Brien, welcome to the party. Monday's great. Call me Monday afternoon saying we're really, really close. But at some point in time, since I've heard that for 4 months, I probably won't care. So, like I'm telling you, we're out of time. I'm not taking sides except to say the system has to work. I'm not adverse to the state. I'm building this upon what I've heard for 4 months, that this isn't going to be a death penalty case. Now I have, like, people slamming their hands on the table, figuratively, saying that what an outrageous thing the court just did. I didn't do it. I only responded to the facts that were represented to me. Even again today, the lawyers are doing a fine job. They're working on where they want to be going. I'm telling you, we're going to go where they say we're going to go. Nobody's walking this back, including the possibility, Ms. Canepa, you're just being suckered by the defense lawyers who are trying to play this for a second trial. With all due respect, I'm not worried about these lawyers. I'm worried about their appellate counsel, who I don't even know, who often throw everybody in the room under the bus. So if you can work out a deal that makes me look like I didn't just overreach, you're welcome to. But Rule 48B is the duty of the court, the authority of the court, to dismiss charges.
Based on merit.
I just gave it to you.
That's not merit.
No. You don't like the merit. So let's just agree to disagree. Let's just agree to disagree.
Prior to today, did the court give the state or the defendant a deadline on this agreement? Prior to today, did the court say, if you don't have a defendant's agreement, which is, again, an unorthodox thing, you're going to dismiss the death specifications unilaterally? Prior to today, was there any thought of sentencing the defendant? What is the court's reason for moving forward with sentencing on the defendant?
I don't owe anybody anything except to finish cases at my own discretion. I understand you don't want it that way. I understand that you would like to have witnesses.
Plea agreements were constructed before different courts who indicated they would abide by that. But now again, because you're the new judge in town, you come in here and you undo our prior agreements with different counsel that aren't even in the courtroom.
Anything.
You're
I only
me
told you.
You know the ramifications of sentencing the co-defendants in this case.
Of course I do. Then why aren't you ahead of me?
You prevent them from being witnesses for the state because they can say, I'm not testifying.
You're the one that said you had them all packaged up and ready to go. Now, I don't
Under
think
the agreements, Your Honor, that you are seeking to undermine. And you think this is funny?
No.
There were 8 people murdered in the middle of the night.
How about we agree that you've been telling me for months to look for something that may not ever happen? I'm telling you we're not going to go forward with a trial when everybody in the room is going to be ineffective based upon your representations and the defense's reputations. Not like the state did anything wrong.
But the state
We are
is being
not
punished for it.
You have this habit that's annoying. It's conversational talk. I get it. I understand completely how this puts you in an awkward spot.
Awkward?
So let's just agree to disagree. I'm telling you, we're going to get decisive and we're going to get done.
I think the court is demonstrating complete bias in this case.
Of course you would say that and I don't have any bias. No. I have a duty to get this case done.
Well, if I understand correctly, the court has given us till Monday to present this agreement that is yet to be produced, in which instance the court separating out the Gilbert issue, would the court still be sentencing if that agreement is presented, the co-defendants?
I don't think the public understands that we're actually supposed to put in a certain order in how things get done. But the public does perceive delay. The public does see the courts as an institution of glacial movement. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. There's a lot of intense work that has to get done to get cases to the trial and to the finish stage. I suspect everybody that's a victim wants to have a chance to tell me the hurt, the pain, the ramifications, and for years and years and years, they've had to wait. I suspect it would be cathartic, healthy for them to be able to finally speak, but they have to wait too. So the day for waiting is done. I can revisit on any occasion any part of the case that's necessary. I haven't made my mind up on what anything should happen is. I told the victims I'm not bound by what the lawyers agree. Never have been, no court is, unless the plea agreement encompasses a contractual understanding, which I don't think happened. So I'm not going to go making decisions today on what I'm going to do with regard to sentencing, but I am going to schedule sentencings in advance of this trial. And then if everybody works out something, I can rethink, as I'm supposed to, in real time, what's appropriate under the facts. Under the circumstances and facts today, there can't be any more time for promises. It's put up or shut up time. I'm not biased here. This cuts both ways. It puts everybody in an awkward spot. But it's not about being happy. It's about being efficient and thorough and seeking finality, which somebody lost years ago because there's a lot of intense work to do. I get it. There's a process to go through. But this can't keep going the way it's not going. So I appreciate it. Work on it. Nail it down if you can. I'm not interested in anybody getting sued for being ineffective or having ethics issues. That cuts both ways. I just put the defense in a bad spot, and she's arguing your case. Good luck if we try this case of the death penalty spec, because you're going to be screaming louder than she just was about the great injustice that just happened. So thanks to the lawyers, thanks to the court staff and the court reporter, we can go ahead and go off the record. Those will be the orders.
Thank you.
All right. So I see the judge on this both ways. Yes. So I apologize, Chris. I don't know why you're not showing up on my live stream on my phone. I apologize on that, Chris. I have it now. Um, so yes, no one at the moment is facing the death penalty. Uh, and the reason for that is because Jake Wagner, when he in 2020 made the plea deal with the state, he decided that he was going to testify against the entire rest of his family, but the death penalty had to be removed from everybody's case. And honestly, I absolutely agree that, you know, Jake Wagner did the, um, you know, pleading so that he could save his entire family. Now, that's kind of where Angela Wagner, though, um, when she made her plea deal was more just for herself. Um, and honestly, if everybody gets sentenced before Billy Wagner goes to court to trial for this, that really gives Jake zero incentive to tell the truth. Um, because they then will have pulled the death penalty off of the table for Billy Wagner. And Jake would then have been seen as fulfilling his end of the contract because they would have then sentenced George Wagner the fourth as well. Um, and Jake Wagner would then be sentenced too. So if Jake already knows that the death penalty is off of the table because he's already been sentenced, then what is there really to tell the truth about? Um, because what this judge has decided was he was going to pull the death penalty off of the table to begin with. Um, and that's why Angela Canepa is so upset. Um, but not only was he going to pull the death penalty off of the table entirely for um, George Wagner the third, Billy Wagner, um, she was arguing because sentencing everybody after they pulled um, the death penalty off the table for Billy Wagner, that then gives nobody any incentive to tell the truth. And Angela Wagner, she has to testify for her 30 years that she pled down to. Now, it doesn't have to be to the same extent as what Jake Wagner's is. Um, it's not to the satisfaction of the prosecution, and Angela's testimony will only affect her. But she got significantly reduced charges. She was facing life in prison without parole and got it pled down to 30 years in prison for significantly lesser charges. Um, it was like conspiracy to commit murder, obstructing justice, um, tampering with evidence, and some other things. But they were all much, much lesser charges than truly what she should face. Because it was clear that she was the one who, um, it was clear that she was the one who orchestrated this whole mess. I do have the next video, which is the Vinnie Politan video, pulled up. Um, And so we will go ahead um, and watch that. Give me 1 second here. All right. So here we go into the Vinnie Politan series. I am going to let Vinny do a lot of the explaining. He introduces some new key points of contention um, that weren't really touched upon in as much detail. I really feel that some of the perspectives that Vinny gives are nice, and he does go into a little bit more detail about the relationship behind Jake and Hannah, um, than what really was able to fit into those like 16 and like 21-minute segments that I had you guys watching yesterday. So without further ado, into the Vinnie Politan footage.
Eight people dead, and God knows who did it. There was fear, there was shock.
Breaking tonight, investigators are asking for the public's help in the Rhoden murder investigation.
Investigators want any information the public has about the family.
The public was dying to know, when will this family face justice?
Her crime was not submitting to the control of the Wagners.
They wanted to create him to be this angry monster.
After their testimony, you kind of felt like his fate was sealed.
We are traveling today to Piketon, the scene of the Pike County Massacre, where 8 people from the same family were all shot and killed execution style as they slept. The investigation would stretch from the hills of Appalachia to the mountains of Alaska and reveal a murderous plot involving an entire household and lead to the trial of one family member who insists he had nothing to do with any of it.
When I need quick, delicious meals during the week, I order Tempo by Home Chef. Tempo delivers fully prepared.
It all began early in the morning on Friday, April 22nd, 2016, outside the small town of Piketon, Ohio.
911. Danny just got here. Please, gotta come here. What's going on? There's blood all over the house.
It was a big breaking news event when it occurred. Initially, there was just reports that there were multiple bodies found in Pike County. I think myself and many others assumed that it was a murder-suicide scenario, especially later in the day when they found a body across town.
At the center of it all was 19-year-old Hannah Mae Rhoden, who was found shot to death in her bed with her child in her arms, still alive. Also dead in the home was her mother, Dana Rhoden, and her younger brother, Chris Jr. Her father, Chris Sr., was also found shot multiple times with his cousin, Gary Rhoden, just a few feet away. A couple miles away was the home of Hannah's older brother, Clarence Frankie Rhoden, and his fiancée, Hannah Gilly, dead in their beds with their young child lying between them, covered in blood, and another child in the home also alive. And then finally, a few miles down the road was the camper where Kenneth Rhoden lived, also shot dead.
There was fear, there was shock, and it was definitely a community that felt like they were in danger. 8 people dead, and God knows who did it. Lots of people told us that.
Now, in the beginning, the Wagners were pushing this off as, it was a drug killing. They were the ones that kind of brought to light the fact that some of the members of the Rhoden family sold cannabis and had cannabis plants. And so the Wagners were really pushing this off as a drug deal, gone wrong kind of a thing. And it is really heartbreaking to see the full scope of what happened and the full intricacies of everything that was planned. And shit, I just realized that we watched all that and you guys had no freaking video. Oh my God. Will somebody tell me? Do you guys want me to go back so you guys can actually see, or do you just want to continue? I can always go back if you guys want. I'll give everybody a second to put in chat. And thank you, Chris, for always watching, because honestly, I don't think that you have really missed a live at this point. So thank you so much. Thank you for being such a valued supporter. I really, truly appreciate you. I don't know if you're actually still watching or not. I'm just assuming that you are and probably just lurking, which is fine. I still wanted to give you a shout out. You are honestly one of the best, biggest fans ever. All right, so nobody's answering, so we'll just continue. If you guys want me to go back or something, I can always do like a clip that shows what you guys missed. I'm so sorry.
They slept with their guns loaded.
It was like a bomb being dropped. I had never even heard of a homicide like this. It was very, very, very shocking. Law enforcement initially had few clues.
Okay, I swear I will stop interrupting after this. I want you guys to pay attention to how much space is actually between these murder sites, because when they say miles, you're sitting here and you're picturing what most people imagine, which would be like an urban area or a suburban area where, you know, a couple of miles, it seems like so much less. I lived in the country. I understand how weird time can warp when you're just surrounded by nature. A few miles can feel like forever if you're just staring at green trees and rolling hills and grass and cows and machinery and just landscape after landscape. Whereas if you have buildings and billboards and signs and people doing weird things, those couple of miles seem to kind of fly by. Um, and so we tend to get this image of, oh, a couple of miles isn't that much, when in reality it really is. And so I want you to take in how expansive this crime scene really was. Because I feel that for what law enforcement was faced with, they did an impeccable job. Was their police work perfect? No. Did it take them probably longer to to close the case on this crime? Yes, that is exactly what I think of, Chris. Um, but did it take them longer than it probably would have any other area to, you know, close this case? Absolutely. But I really give law enforcement so much credit, because this was an expansive area. This was so hard. Um, and the scope of this crime was literally so unthinkable that even my anxiety rattled brain would never have been able to come up with this type of a scenario. And trust me, I can come up with some sort of a crisis for just about everything. Strangely enough, and you can tell that my children are autistic too by this, but we were all talking in the car about various different ways that you can cease to live, all because my daughter said that cars weren't safe and that she was never going to own a car and she was always going to ride a bike everywhere. And then I explained how riding a bike is not really any safer, especially if you're sharing the road with other cars, and the devastating effects of being hit by a car if you're riding a bike. And then it just blossomed into 15 minutes of morbid conversation about ways that you can die ridiculously, too, for some of it. And this is not something that even I would have been able to come up with. And I'm not laughing because the topic is funny. I'm laughing because the morbid conversations that you can have that really show the place that your brain can be in. Um, and it also just goes to show how unthinkable and incredible this crime was. And I don't mean incredible in like a good way. I mean incredible because for 2 years, the Wagners were able to get away with this, even. Um, and the police work that came out of this. I am proud of the legacy that had to be left behind because of this horrific aftermath. And I feel that out of this horrendous crime, something good came out of this. Those officers will be able to go to other police departments and be able to be such a benefit to those people in that community because of the knowledge that they gained from this. They will be able to come with outside of the box ideas that could revolutionize law enforcement so that other people's loved ones do not have to go through this. And I don't know if I'm considered an optimist or a pessimist because I see both sides of the coin and I try to acknowledge both the good that can come out of a situation like this, while I also acknowledge the harm and the pain that can come out of a situation like this. And I'm over here all teary eyed and crying, and I apologize. But these were 8 innocent people that should not have lost their lives. These are so many babies that were traumatized that should not be traumatized. This is not just one whole family destroyed, but multiple. And so I feel like while giving it some levity, we need to also honor the good that can come out of it. Because this is a hard topic. Um, and I am really proud of law enforcement for this one. And I am sorry for getting all sappy and cryy. Um, as I have said on my Facebook page, this story really hits close to home for me. And it always has. And I've kind of really gravitated towards it because I grew up a couple of hours outside of Piketon, in Ohio, for a good majority of my life. And I also grew up in rural Pennsylvania, so I understand how things like this can just devastate a town because everybody knows everybody. It is a totally different atmosphere than what you get in the city. And country living truly is a culture. It's not just something that, you know, you kind of get tossed into. It really is a culture, and, um, you kind of have to immerse yourself in that culture when you're living in the country. Um, and at the time of this crime, I was pregnant with my youngest child, who is now 8 years old. And I was in an abusive relationship at the time. And so for me, this really hits home. And this was actually one of the biggest cases that really got me to a point where I started truly considering being able to leave my situation. Um, and so this case had a tremendous impact on me, um, right from the start. Um, in the fact that, I was only 10 years older than Hannah Mae was when this happened. And a lot of the people that were victims were roughly in my age group, age range, whatever I was trying to say. Um, and so this case just hit so much closer to home for me. And again, this is another reason why I do not envy that judge, because he is truly in a situation that I would not want to be in, because I honestly, again, don't know if I could be objective and fair in this situation, because I don't even know the family. I'm not related to the family or anything, but I am angry for the Rhodens for what they have to have as the aftermath of all of this. The family members that they are never going to get to see or interact with again. Um, I'm angry for what they lost. Um, and so yeah, I'm gonna let the video get back, and I'm gonna let my nervous system take a little break so that maybe when I come back I'm not so emotional.
Clues about who could have committed such a horrific crime.
We have one person who is armed and dangerous. There may be more than one. There may be two, there may be three. We just don't know at this point, how many people we're really talking about at all.
Well, just about everyone in this tight-knit community in Pike County had some connection to the Rhodens. They were definitely a big, sprawling family, tight-knit and deep roots in the community.
It's a small town. Everybody knows everyone. Things like that don't happen here.
Everybody was shocked, sad for the children that are left behind.
As days passed with little information coming from law enforcement, one theory kept resurfacing.
People who knew them also knew that the Rhoden family had this marijuana grow operation, and that Chris Sr. was kind of at the head of it, and that Kenneth Rhoden, was a big contributor.
Initially, there was this disclosure of this large marijuana growing operation there at the Rhoden property. There was discussion of organized crime.
Because the killers were able to go undetected, just kind of gave rise to early theories that this could have been a drug hit or a cartel hit.
I think it was very clear to the locals that it was meant to send a message, but we just didn't know who.
A drug-related killing made some sense, as it became clear the killings were not random.
You couldn't stumble upon these homes.
We're talking about very isolated, very far out. And it's hard to imagine. We're in the foothills of Appalachia here, and they were in the hills.
And whoever perpetrated the massacre knew what they were doing.
It was a crime scene that was actually pretty clean of a lot of the traditional physical evidence that you hope to see in like a mass shooting. Not a lot of ballistics, not a lot of DNA or fingerprint evidence that could lead to suspects.
I think that lent credibility to the fact that it had to be more sophisticated. Nobody could pull this off locally. Very methodical, very calculated, very cruel.
The investigators were also trying to find the killer or killers in a community that kept to itself and was skeptical of outsiders.
It's a rural community. It's Appalachia. There's a high poverty level. It was hit hard by the opioid pandemic. At the same time, it's a very proud community.
Sometimes with that comes people that have to do things to make a living. that other people look down upon, but they're doing what they have to do to survive.
Domain.com is for the doers. And when you're ready to put your big idea online, this is where it all starts.
As the investigation turned from days into weeks, law enforcement remained tight-lipped. And with little information, the national media stepped in to fill the vacuum.
Just because of the brutality of the act, parents killed with their children in their arms. It really grabbed national headlines.
There was a huge media circus that took place. The hotels were full of national and international media.
We were inundated with law enforcement, news cameras, news crews.
But as the weeks turned into months, the media lost interest, and law enforcement continued to stay silent.
The consensus was, this is never getting solved. We'll never know what happened here. And so I think people had generally given up hope that there was never going to be a real conclusion to this investigation.
But the Ohio Attorney General vowed to press on.
I believe this case will be solved. We will remain in Pike County until it is, in fact, solved.
And then, a break in the case.
Breaking tonight, investigators are asking for the public's help in the Rhoden murder investigation.
They are looking for information about another family connected to the victims. Investigators want any information the public has about the family.
Over a year after the massacre, dozens of law enforcement agents were seen swarming multiple properties belonging to a family well known in Pike County, the Wagners.
The Wagners, yeah, they were well known also within the community. They had a lot of property holdings throughout the region and throughout the county, so they were definitely well known around Pike County.
They also had a bit of a reputation as outlaws who committed petty crimes together as a family. The patriarch, Billy Wagner, taught his sons at a young age how to pick locks on vending machines and then later on trucks so that they could steal hauls from commercial vehicles. Billy found jobs and, supported the family, but Angela also had her own business pursuits. She had a hobby farm where she used her sons as what they both described as hired labor, unwilling labor at a certain point.
And the Wagners knew the Rhodens well. Jake Wagner had been in a relationship with Hannah Rhoden, who had gotten pregnant and given birth to their daughter Sophia when Hannah was just 15 and Jake 20.
Okay, so I want to take a minute because this is going to get a lot of people their panties up in a bunch. And as much as it is frowned upon within society, this kind of dynamic where, a teenager is doing adult things with an adult, while I agree it is not okay, it is very common in rural areas for things like this to happen. And so, please, again, I do not agree. I do not think that it is okay. But I do also understand that, again, it is kind of the culture. Where you kind of feel like because your mama married early and had kids, also as a teenager, and her life seems amazing, that is going to be your fairy tale. And a lot of people in the more rural areas don't always have that mindset that some of these generational things should not continue. And that's just one of those things that isn't always looked at, talked about, or mentioned. That this is still very much an issue within the rural communities of the United States, and that it's normal for their communities. And again, I'm not saying it's okay, I'm not saying that it's right, but it does happen, and we do need to acknowledge the fact that it does happen. And we need to acknowledge what the dynamics that can come out of that for a relationship, for a teenager. So, if you have kids, pay attention to this dynamic. Um, you know, recognize the clear signs of abuse that were happening and try to pay attention to those, you know, in your children, in your teenagers as they get older, because you don't want them to be in a situation like this and them not feel like they have the ability to come to you. The last thing that you want to do is um, leave them to feel like they're on their own when they don't need to be on their own in a situation like this. Um, so thank you everybody for being here. Thank you everybody for listening. Um, this case is a very, very hard one. Um, and there's so many lessons that can be learned from this case.
Family, friends, and the pastor has told us that Jake Wagner got along well with the Rhoden family, and they supposedly had a pretty good relationship right up until the custody battle with Sophia Wagner came up, and that's when things kind of went sour between the two families.
So sour, authorities hinted that they believed the family feud may have been a motive behind the massacre.
Family is the most important thing to a lot of people in these communities, and so it's not surprising that would be a part of the motive.
A month after the Wagner's farm was searched, the Ohio Attorney General's office released a statement asking the public for more information about the Wagners.
Everyone knew that the Wagners had left town, had gone to Alaska. That wasn't a terribly good look for them.
Up in Alaska, the announcement generated a huge number of calls to police, and media reports revealed that the family was living on the Kenai Peninsula a few hours southwest of Anchorage.
That was a notable step in the case because it's told everyone that, hey, these are people that are definitely right within the scope of law enforcement, and they're clearly just waiting for them to screw up somehow.
The Wagners eventually left Alaska and moved back east, while pressure grew on authorities to make an arrest.
The public was dying to know, when will this family, face justice? Because by this point, especially in Pike County, all eyes were on them.
On November 13th, 2018, nearly 2.5 years after the brutal execution of the Rhoden family, Ohio authorities issued arrest warrants for Angela and Billy Wagner and their sons, Jake and George.
These 4 individuals are now in custody for allegedly committing this heartless, ruthless, cold-blooded murder.
Investigators said the massacre had nothing to do with drugs. Incredibly, they alleged that the 4 Wagners plotted to wipe out an entire family for the sole purpose of gaining custody of Sophia, the daughter that Jake had with Hannah Rhoden.
We believe that the Wagners conspired together to develop an elaborate plan to kill the 8 victims. The aggravated murder charges also include death penalty specifications for all 4 suspects.
Coming up, Ohio prepares for the biggest murder trial in its history. But before it can begin, Jake Wagner takes a plea deal that will protect him if he agrees to testify for the state. After the most exhaustive murder investigation in the history of the state of Ohio, law enforcement officials arrested 4 members of the Wagner family for the so-called Pike County Massacre. Authorities allege that the motive behind the massacre wasn't drugs at all, but what would become the bloodiest custody battle in Ohio history. The trial for the murder of 8 members of the Rhoden family began in Piketon, Ohio on September 12, 2022.
Okay, now I have a question. Oh, I apologize. I have a question for everybody. Um, what do you guys feel would give somebody the right to feel like they could do this. Now, I understand that children are a huge contention point for, um, you know, people's feelings and the animosities that they face. Um, but, you know, I don't know if it's because while I feel animosity towards my ex, and while we have a very contentious relationship, um, I could never imagine wanting something bad to happen to him. Um, and so I just struggle to see. But I also struggle to see how murder for any reason, not just custody, could. Oh, I apologize. I am so noisy today. And not with talking. But I struggle to see how murder in any way, shape, or form is considered to be okay. Do you guys have any feelings on what you guys feel could be going through their heads? And this is just all speculation. It's just asking for an opinion. Um, but I don't know, from the perspective of somebody who tends to be very black and white, I just can't see anything being worth potentially spending the rest of my life in prison away from my children. And I don't know if it's because I immerse myself in so much true crime that I know that the likelihood of me being able to get away with something like that would be very slim, despite all the stuff that I know. Like, I know that in the moment, no matter how well you have thought about or planned something, there is still so many more things that can go wrong. And with today's technology in this day and age, it's even harder than ever to be able to get away with any type of a crime. And so, you know, I have that kind of a thinking. And so, to me, nothing is worth being able to potentially be away from my family because I got caught for some sort of a crime like this. Um, and it's not worth it to me to lose like a loved one if they were to commit a crime like this. Um, so if you guys have any ideas on what could potentially cause somebody to be able to justify this, I would love to hear it. Um, because again, I can't bring myself to be able to look at it in quite that way. And I would love to get everybody else's perspectives on that.
Describe him. There is nothing on this
The prosecution was led by Angela Canepa.
nothing. Hannah Mae found difficulty because Jake wanted Angela Wagner to really parent Sophia Wagner. They would want Sophia to call Angela mom even when Hannah Mae was sitting right there.
She kind of, was a little creeped out by the family dynamic. Angela Wagner was really very much like a controlling force in her son's lives. So the relationship fell apart pretty quickly, and Hannah left the Wagner home, and she took Sophie with her.
Her crime was not returning the love of Jake Wagner and not submitting to the control of the Wagners. And
Jake apparently harbored some suspicions that Hannah was letting their daughter, Sophie, be sexually abused, maybe molested by men in her life. The Wagners were pretty aggressively trying to obtain full custody of Sophie.
during this time, she says, I won't sign papers ever. They'll have to kill me first. Just over 4 months later, Hannah Mae and 7 members of her family are dead. This was not a crime of passion. This was not in a fit of rage. This was not in self-defense. These murders happened after a period of 3 months of planning and plotting and purchasing and preparing and executing.
Now, I want everybody to pay attention to what they mean by the amount of preparation that went into this, the amount of planning that went into this, because honestly, it is sick. Only the worst psychopaths and sociopaths would be able to come up with this intricate of a plan, try to enact this plan, go through with it, and then feel like they can't get caught. I mean, they looked over so many bases, and like the amount of detail in this planning is just a level of psychopathy that I don't think I have ever really truly seen for quite some time. Um, and the premeditation on this is just beyond. When she says months of planning, they were tracking Tabitha's Facebook. If I remember correctly, they were tracking Hannah Mae's Facebook, or Tabitha's mom. It was Tabitha's mom, not Hannah Mae's. I apologize. They were tracking Tabitha's mom's Facebook. They were tracking cell phones. They were tracking routine. It's just mind-boggling. And the things that take down the Wagner family seem to have been like common sense things that if they had just, been an eensy bit smarter about the crime that they were committing, they very well may have gotten away with it. And it is scary to think how close they truly were to getting away with this. It wasn't until there was starting to be a breakdown within the family and the family dynamic about this that, there was any consideration that this could have been the Wagners. It's really crazy.
Eight individuals of a family.
While the prosecution spent most of their opening statement on laying out the case against the Wagner family,
They recovered.
there was only one person on trial, George Wagner. That's because Jake Wagner, the man accused of doing most of the killing, had already pleaded guilty.
What plea do you wish to enter in count 7 to the charge of aggravated murder of Hannah Mae Rhoden? I am guilty, Your Honor.
Many called it the best plea deal in the history of the state of Ohio, is that this admitted gunman was going to basically be spared the death penalty in exchange for admitting his role and testifying against his relatives.
Jake's mother, Angela, soon followed suit.
So after Jake strikes the plea deal with prosecutors, Angela Wagner strikes her own deal. She also avoids the death penalty by admitting her role and implicating her sons in the plot to kill the Rhodens. George Wagner was represented by John Parker and Richard Nash, two very aggressive defense attorneys.
This is a trial about the state of Ohio against George Wagner. It's not the Wagners. It's not Billy Wagner. It's not Angela Wagner, nor is it Jake Wagner. This is all about George. As you hear the evidence in this case, you must ask yourself, every time you hear the Wagners, think of how that applies to George. They don't want to try an individual. Instead, what they wanted to do was try the Wagners. They knew they were in trouble with treating George as an individual.
Coming up, the jury hears from those first on the scene of the Pike County Massacre.
You said blood everywhere?
Yeah.
And when you say blood everywhere, can you tell us where specifically?
It was on the body, on the bed, on the walls.
These are the cases that captivated the world.
Couldn't keep my life straight.
That demanded our attention.
They were killed by their own children.
That challenged the legal system and ourselves.
How in the world can a mother wait 30 days before reporting her child missing?
These are the trials that became legendary. And now you can relive them all in one place. CourtTV Legendary Trials. Go to CourtTV.com/legendary trials to find out how to watch.
HoneyBook keeps your proposals, contracts, invoices, and payments all in one place. My name is Laura Gomez, and I've partnered with over 100 brands. So try.
After his mother Angela and brother Jake pleaded guilty, George Wagner was on trial and facing life in prison for being an accomplice to the murder of 8 members of the Rhoden family. It was a brutal crime that the prosecution spent 3 days making horrifyingly real. Timothy Dickerson was one of the first responders to Dana Rhoden's house, where he discovered the bodies of Hannah Mae, her mother Dana, brother Chris Jr., and a survivor.
You found the 3 deceased individuals in there. And once you'd seen that, what did you do?
Well, one thing that happened was I know in the bed. Either I made a noise or there was a noise because the baby's arms came up. And I hollered for them to get a medic.
Could you give us an approximate age of the little baby, if you could, Director Dickerson?
I learned later that the baby was 3 days old. It was very, very tiny.
I just glanced around a little.
Justin Waring responded to the home of Frankie Rhoden and his fiancée, Hannah Gilley.
There was a young child that was probably 4 or 5 years old that was running around in the yard. And then there was a infant child who was around 6 months old.
And did you notice anything unusual about the infant?
The infant was covered with blood.
James Manley, Dana Rhoden's brother, was also on the scene.
Well, I walk up to the yard and see Frankie's baby covered in blood. And blood everywhere.
Specifically?
It was on the body, on the bed, on the walls.
While investigators had plenty of evidence of a brutal crime, they had almost no DNA or fingerprint evidence linking the Wagners to the shooting. So they painstakingly reconstructed the Wagners' purchases prior to the massacre.
The prosecution's case is that this is a family that operated together in everything they did, from living together, sharing finances, to their marriages.
The financial records also just confirm what we already knew, which was they function as one unit in pretty much everything they do.
So the prosecution really focused on these purchases of items that could have been used to create the murder weapon. Drill bits, filters, and flashlights. Items to make an impromptu murder weapon, an impromptu silencer.
And one person's name surfaced repeatedly in relation to those purchases.
Who was the owner of this account?
George.
With respect to other purchases on that credit card, flashlights, and then the purchase of Waverly Rural King, again, only listed owner of that credit card at that time is this defendant, George Wagner, correct?
Correct.
While investigators found no clear physical evidence linking George Wagner to the crime scene, they did find a set of bloody footprints.
So the actual floors that were cut up and removed from the scene were brought to you?
Yes, they were.
And can you tell us what we are looking at in this particular slide?
Item 21 and item 24, the ones on the end, they were a left shoe impression that corresponded with a size 11 Walmart athletic work shoe. 22 corresponded with the left
size 10.5 Walmart athletic shoe. The prosecution had video of Angela Wagner entering a Walmart, not exactly a smoking gun, but then investigators unearthed a receipt showing what she had purchased that day.
These are the Walmart brand athletic shoes, size 10.5, and it would match the SKU for the receipt from the trailer at State Route 41.
And obviously,
But some of the most compelling testimony would not come from the crime scene, but from a woman who, like Hannah, was accused by the Wagners of abusing Sophie and lived to tell the story. Before moving north to Alaska, Jake went to court and obtained sole custody of Sophia Wagner. Elizabeth Armour met Jake Wagner at a church the Wagners attended in Alaska, where she sometimes worked in the nursery.
I had come out of the nursery for taking care of the children. Jake was at the other end of the hallway, kind of noticing me.
At some point, did your relationship with Jake become more serious?
9 months after I met him, he asked me to marry him.
The couple got married just a few months later. Elizabeth Armour vividly remembers her wedding night.
So, since I grew up Amish,
Okay. I just want to say this. I feel that Elizabeth is extremely brave. She got up on stand and recounted every ounce of the nightmare that she lived through when she was living with the Wagners and while she was married to Jake Wagner. And she is so truly brave to be up talking about that. Especially considering she truly feared for her life while she was on stand. And her testimony was so compelling. It really goes to paint the picture of abuse and the level of abuse that the Wagners were able to inflict on people. The amount of gaslighting and just, it's crazy. And I hope that Elizabeth gets whatever help that she needs to be able to heal from this experience. Because she also deserves the ability to move on from all of this.
I didn't really have any experience with men. I had requested, in no uncertain terms, that we not consummate marriage on that night, which Jake had agreed to but did not honor. And afterwards, almost immediately, he asked me for my personal information, my phone passcode, my bank account access numbers, my social security card.
Did you also have to sign agreements prior to the marriage?
Yes, I remember Angela and them asking me to sign a paper that it was to keep me from trying to get custody of Sophia in the event of a divorce.
Elizabeth Armour revealed the toxic, intertwined dynamic at play in the Wagner family.
And then, a familiar accusation from Angela Wagner.
Jake came to me and told me that his mom believed that I had touched Sophia inappropriately.
Elizabeth was brought before Jake's mother, Angela.
I was called into the kitchen. Jake said that he didn't believe I had done it, but that, I needed to explain myself. He laid it out very clearly to me that if I had done it, that the right thing to do would be to string me up in the barn, beat me to death with the baseball bat, bulldoze the barn, burn it down, and hunt down and kill my family. And that if he didn't do it, his mom would do it, his dad would do it, George would do it. Any of them would be willing to do this because it would be the right thing to do.
The prosecution also played telephone conversations that investigators recorded showing Angela pressuring Jake to divorce Elizabeth.
I told you, Jake, I would not trust her. I told you that. Stop thinking about yourself. You need to realize what's important. Because I know Sophie will be in danger.
The prosecution also called another woman who had experienced life with the Wagners, George's ex-wife, Tabitha Clater.
If you could just tell us what the family dynamics were there when you lived with the Wagners.
Very strange and controlling.
Okay. And what makes you say that?
If Angela made a rule, then you had to follow that rule.
Did you feel when you were there that you could parent your child in the way that you wanted to?
No.
Tell us about that.
Every night before we went to bed, I would be made to go take a nap while Angela played with my son.
Tabitha also testified about a time she tried to leave the Wagners after an argument with George.
I told them that I was not going to go back inside, that I was going to leave. And so Angela threw a board at me and then told George that she's going to go inside and get a gun.
When you say she threw a board at you, what kind of a board?
A 2x4.
So when Angela says she's going to go get a gun, what do you do?
I continue going out the yard and through the fence, and I hid underneath of George's truck.
She eventually biked to a nearby gas station and called her mother to come pick her up. But while she was waiting in a police car, she found out that the Wagners had filed a complaint against her.
And what type of complaint was that?
Domestic violence.
What was alleged against you?
That I was causing a big fuss at home and dragging my child across the floor.
Did you drag your child across the floor?
No, I did not.
George eventually filed for divorce, alleging Tabitha's family members might abuse their son.
After we got divorced, it was about a year before I got to see my son again.
Coming up, George Wagner's brother Jake and mother Angela testify, portraying George as an actor.
Now, to me, it is absolutely insane the amount of domestic violence that that family was capable of getting away with. I want to say that it surprises me, but it really doesn't. Abuse victims are never looked at very kindly. And oftentimes we are not allowed to give our narrative of a situation before we are held accountable for things that other people chose to do. And so it makes it very difficult to move past some of these horrific events that we go through, which is why so many women try to leave, but they're unable to, because the justice system just does not work in our favor when it comes to these things. And I am never against, a father being in a child's life, but I also feel that the court system is oftentimes used by perpetrators of violence to really inflict more violence on the person that they had children with, because it's this repetitive having to see them. So they will constantly break court orders. They will abuse their kids. They will, just kind of skirt around their court orders so they're still compliant, but they're not actually compliant. And, they'll file court hearings against the other person for no reason. They will allege things that never even happened yet. They will allege things that they claim that they saw that they have no proof of. And because the victims very rarely actually are listened to in these cases, um, the perpetrator of the violence oftentimes wins those even without any evidence to prove, you know, why they feel that their way is what happened to the child versus the victim who may have evidence to the contrary, but may not be able to present it because of the type of hearing that they're having and things like that. Um, so it is a very unforgiving dynamic between the perpetrator and the victim of violence. It's hard. It is very, very hard, especially when there are children involved. It gets even more complicated. Um, and so, yeah, um, we are going to get back to this. And just know that, you know, there are people bringing attention to cases just like this one all the time. Um, and I will also strive to be one of those content creators. As difficult as these cases are, I will always, always, always post about cases that involve some sort of child being a victim. Because as difficult as they are, it is important to see. It is important to see the signs that lead up to that as well.
Active accomplice to the slaughter of the Rhoden family.
They are the ones who put him, at the heart of the conspiracy, the heart of the plan.
Agora Cyber Charter School is ready to put over 18 years of being a leader in online education to work for you.
TV.
The jury had heard in detail how the Wagners plotted to kill the Rhoden family in a custody battle gone horribly wrong. But very little, if any, of the evidence pointed towards the alleged accomplice, George Wagner. Then his brother Jake took the stand.
They needed at least one Wagner, to implicate the others. It was the day really everyone had been waiting for.
His lawyers managed to keep cameras out of the courtroom, but CourtTV producer Emanuela Grinberg was there for Jake's testimony.
Jake Wagner takes a stand and tells this jury that his brother was involved in the plot, in the conspiracy to kill these people.
Jake testified that the entire family was in on the plot and that George was supposed to help kill Chris Rhoden Sr. He described how they built a false bed in the back of a pickup in which he and George hid while his father, Billy, drove up to pay Chris a visit. While Billy walked up to the house, George got in position.
The plan was that George was going to shoot Chris Sr. from a distance, like a sniper, in a fashion that Chris would never know what hit him, would never know that Billy Wagner was betraying him.
They're outside the house poised to do it, and then George just refuses. he can't do it. And then that's how Jake, gets involved in starting to shoot people.
According to Jake, George stood by while Jake took a high-powered rifle and shot Chris Rhoden Sr. through the door. Billy used a Glock to finish him off before shooting and killing Gary Rhoden, who was also there, while George stood by and did nothing. Just a few days later, Angela Wagner took the stand, corroborating much of the state's circumstantial case against her son George, including the one piece of physical evidence loosely linking him to the crime.
She testified about her role in buying the shoes that allegedly made the bloody shoe print that was attributed indirectly to George and Jake. The testimony of Jake and Angela Wagner, they are the ones who put him, at the heart of the conspiracy, the heart of the plan. They put him at the crime scene. So after their testimony, you kind of felt like, his fate was sealed.
But then, the defense called a surprise witness to the stand.
When George Wagner took the stand, it was a huge shock. Didn't really see it coming.
All the jurors knew about George was the evidence that the state had put forward. They wanted to create him to be this angry monster. That was the challenge.
Now, I watched this trial. I watched this trial live. I watched George Wagner take the stand. Thank God it was nap time at the preschool that I was working at the time. I was able to, take in pretty much the entire testimony for George Wagner. And just, wow. The amount of things that were implied and not actually said was very telling. The questioning by the defense was also very telling. And I feel bad that George the Fourth, wasn't able to break away from his family, because I feel like if he was able to get away from Angela, Jake, and George the Third, like he claimed that he had been trying to do, I feel like he probably could have led a very different life. Yeah, we're gonna listen to a little bit of George's testimony in this. And it's heartbreaking. It's hard to listen to either way, because George tries to paint himself as something that we very clearly know that he is not. But he shows the potential that he could have had, the potential that is now totally and completely lost because he remained mixed up with the bad parts of his family.
Challenge was to introduce evidence that he was an individual, introduce evidence that he was different than the others.
George first described his father, Billy, introducing him to a life of crime.
My father taught me how to open a lock, how to steal fuel, how to steal loads or break into loads.
What do you mean by loads?
Tractor and trailer loads, semi-loads of whatever might be on it.
How did he do that?
Just go around, show you how to open them, get in them, and drive off with them. When I was a young kid, I wanted to be either a game warden or a forester. Then when I got older, my father pushed me more towards being a diesel mechanic and a truck driver.
All right. And why was that, do you know?
My father didn't want nobody in the family that wore a badge.
Why was that?
He thought all law enforcement was crooked.
He disagreed with things that his family had done in their life, the crimes that they had committed, where he said he was no longer a part of what they were doing.
Eventually, I quit.
Quit what?
Everything my dad taught me.
Where did you go?
I made it down into Kentucky.
How far away did you get to Kentucky?
250 miles, roughly.
And what happened?
I had a choice of running out of fuel and continue going or turn back.
So what happened?
I turned back.
Why did you turn back?
I had no money and no fuel and nowhere to go.
What were you thinking when you left?
I was just tired of putting up with my mom and dad.
Was that the last time you attempted it?
No.
They were trying to really paint a picture of a person who was just stuck and was trying to, break away from this lifestyle that he'd been brought up into, and that it was just, despite his efforts, he couldn't get unstuck.
George was one to go out. He was one to go out and associate with other people, have friends away from home, and do what a typical teenager would do as far as, alcohol, just exploring, the world as a young person would do.
Did that cause any problems back at the home on Bethel?
Yeah, my mother didn't like me being down there.
Why not?
She said it was a bad environment and bad influences, and I was basically going to end up sending myself to hell from it.
She obviously, as most mothers, would not want their child out doing these things. Jake didn't. He did exactly as his mother wished. He was essentially a perfect child. He obeyed his mother.
Finally, the defense argued that George Wagner had no reason for wanting the Rhodens dead because they were some of his best friends.
We've heard a lot about Jake and Hannah's relationship. Describe your relationship with Hannah.
I looked to Hannah as a baby sister.
What do you mean by that?
My brother might be biologically my brother, but we never acted like brothers. Hannah acted like a baby sister to me. We go fishing together, four-wheeling, fix Buckeyes during the holidays. Talk to each other about what was bothering each other.
He viewed Hannah as like a younger sister. They got along really well. He viewed Frankie Rhoden, as a good friend of his. He had no desire to kill his best friend.
Did you consider Frankie a good friend?
I considered him my best friend.
Looking at Wagner Exhibit 53-1, this is your wedding photo, right?
Yes.
You have one arm around who?
Tabby.
You have another arm around who else?
Frankie.
He definitely came off as more confident, more self-assured than his brother to some. He might have came off as more compelling or interesting because he really put his face out there, in a way that his alleged co-conspirators weren't willing to do.
Other witnesses testified about how George was different from his brother.
One of the witnesses that I think surprised the state was their own witness, and that was a witness by the name of Samantha. Samantha was very unique and important to this case because she knew Jake, she knew George, she knew the Rhoden family as well. She knew these boys for most of her life.
He and Jake were pretty different personalities. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Right. Jake was kind of a mama's boy. Is that fair?
In my eyes, yes. George would always go out and do his own thing. Jake would always have to get Angela's opinion before he would go do anything. Angela didn't approve. Jake never did.
That was certainly a compelling, narrative that they, advanced. Don't blame him for the sins of his brother, for the sins of his father, for the sins of his mother.
Coming up, the defense attacks what some have called the best plea deal in the history of the state of Ohio.
Jake and Angela have conned the state of Ohio with the greatest goal in mind. Perhaps the most remarkable plea deal possible. The loss of 8 innocent lives. The most deserving of the death penalty, and Jake gets to walk. Angela gets 30 years.
After painting a picture of George Wagner as different from the rest of his family, the defense next took aim at the heart of the prosecution's case, the testimony of Jake and Angela Wagner.
The defense strategy was to undermine Jake and Angela Wagner's testimony and just convince the jury that nothing they say can be believed, especially when it comes to George's involvement, that they were really the masterminds.
The defense first targeted Jake's testimony.
The biggest tool we had in our bag to discredit him is this is a confessed murderer.
During his plea deal, the defense saw a side of Jake they wanted the jury to see.
Not only is he a murderer, but he smiled at every stage of his, every accusation on the stand. I've never dealt with someone who would chuckle and smile as they spoke of doing the most evil things. We wanted that drawn out. We wanted people to see Jake and the way he testified and ask them whether that's the type of evidence you would rely upon in the most important of your affairs.
To discredit Angela, the defense introduced her lifelong history of fraud.
The thing that also blew our mind was the amount of fraud that she had been engaged in with arson. And these were arsons that were committed before George was even 10 years of age.
All right, and what do you mean they burned that?
They burned that one down and succeeded with that one.
Who's dead?
My father and my mother.
And how did they burn it?
Same method as always, a whole bunch of newspapers stuck underneath the fuse box.
Our goal with her was to point out the fraud that she had committed in her life, the incentive that she has now to testify that this is the type of person the state wants you to believe. They gave enticement greater than a pot of gold to get her to say what she needed to say to convict. Our goal one was to introduce that fact, establish that she had unbelievable motivation to save her own life. What absolutely shook us to the core was that the state of Ohio is agreeing to allow Angela to one day be a free person.
Coming up, after 51 days, it would be up to a jury to decide whether or not George Wagner was an accomplice to murder or a scapegoat used by his family to avoid the ultimate punishment. The jury had listened to months of testimony and heard from dozens of witnesses, including George Wagner himself. Now they'd have to decide who they believed. Was it the prosecution who said George Wagner was a willing accomplice to murder, or the defense who insisted his only crime was being a member of the Wagner family?
As each minute and each hour went on, you kind of felt like it boded well for the defense. There was a sense that like, oh, wow, they must really be considering all the evidence.
We felt in our heart that a fair consideration of all of those counts and months of testimony was going to take several days to go through.
But after only 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returns with a verdict.
When they did come back, there was just, wall-to-wall people clamoring to get into the limited seats in the courtroom, media and public.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
Yes.
Would the foreman please, or foreperson please hand the verdict forms to the bailiff here?
It's the part that I hate most about all trials. It's knowing that everything is over, there's nothing more that can happen, and it's that split second before the juror is about to read their verdict.
As to count one, it says, we, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, George Washington Wagner IV, is guilty of aggravated murder as charged in count one of the indictment.
We heard the first guilty, and we knew that if we had one guilty, we had guilty across all of the charges.
Picture this. You're sitting at home alone watching YouTube videos, wondering why you can't find the motivation to do the things you need or want to do.
Okay, so we're almost done with this. After this, I will go ahead and close out the live, but I do want to point out the fact that when the defense team heard that first guilty, their reaction was pure shock. And from watching the trial and seeing all of the judges' rulings and things like that that are kind of missed, when you are, kind of going over recaps like this. Um, it's surprising to me that they seemed legitimately shocked that George Wagner the Fourth was found guilty. Um, because to me it seemed perfectly clear that he was guilty. Um, even though he tried desperately to be different than his family, the fact that, he kept going back really just shows how embedded in that family he was and how important he was to the family and vice versa. And it really shows the mindset that he was in, that while he was sick of the crime, he hadn't quite gotten sick enough of it to completely remove himself from that situation altogether. And I understand how difficult it is to need to cut off a parent. Um, when I was pregnant in 2011 with my oldest, I completely cut my own mother out of my life for the safety of myself and my child. I had even taken her to court and gotten a restraining order against her. Um, so I understand the difficulty of, you know, having to do something like that, but it is entirely possible if you truly want to change your situation. But I am going to finish out this segment and then I will come back on and finish out the live.
The only thing I could do was just a straight face and just look forward. But every guilty finding was just a crushing blow, which was disappointing. Essentially, you're finding out at that point that your life is over as you know it.
It was an emotional moment for the family of the victims who had waited years for justice.
You could see, the families trying to, control their emotions. But, in a way, they couldn't help but, quiet sobs and, people hugging each other. This was just the culmination of so many years of heartache.
For the Rhoden family, the verdict brought some closure.
A little bit of peace. We still have a long road to go. We'll get there.
But it was also a complicated victory.
But you have to realize, George Wagner is human. They just didn't show it on that night.
3 weeks later, on December 19th, 2022, after an emotional hearing where family members of the victims spoke of their agony and pain, Judge Deering sentenced George Wagner IV to life in prison without parole.
Talking to him, it's crushing. But, doing what we do, we know it's not over. This is just round one is over, and that's what we told George. Your day will come, we will appeal, we will make right, the fight goes on.
Billy Wagner has so far pleaded not guilty as well. His trial is scheduled for sometime in 2024.
All right. So you see that as of the time of the recording with Vinny, Billy Wagner's trial had not come up yet. And there were so many delays. It wasn't even funny. And I am truly hoping for both the Wagner family and the Rhoden family that George III's trial does actually happen in January. I am sure both families are beyond ready to get this over with. to be able to move on, to heal, to allow those babies to heal. Many of these children are entering preteen years, and they are having to grow up without their parents and their grandparents and their relatives. Um, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who has watched my live tonight. I appreciate everybody bearing with me um, while I have been sick and just all kinds of not fun stuff. Just a reminder, next week I do start my partial intensive outpatient therapy. So I will be scheduling my lives the day of, but check out like an hour or so before I would go live on my Facebook page, just because there is the potential that that day just may have taken it out of me and I just might not have the energy um, to be able to come on here and articulate my thoughts in a way that everybody will be able to understand. And I have come to learn through my business videos that when I am overwhelmed, it is just better for me to stay off of the lives because my brain just becomes a jumbled mess and it's just all mush and it all blends together and nothing makes sense. Um, but I will definitely let you guys know over Facebook. I will try to update the community post on YouTube with that information as well. Thank you so much, Chris, for always being here. You truly never miss a show, and I appreciate you. I appreciate all of your feedback. And thank you to everybody who hopped on tonight, um, who, just wanted to show their support, even if it was just for a few moments. I appreciate all of you. And I am going to attempt to hop on tomorrow potentially, but we'll see. I need to really focus on cleaning. Um, but have a great night. Everybody have a phenomenal rest of your Sunday. If you are traveling for Thanksgiving, be careful. I hope everybody has a fabulous Thanksgiving. I may hop on here on Thanksgiving as I won't have the kids until Friday. Thanksgiving is my ex's holiday, so I may jump on a little bit earlier in the day on Thanksgiving, do a little bit of a Melody Ferris episode, and I will talk to everybody soon. Have a great holiday. Bye.